The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Washington Square Park as Alexander Petrov set up his chess pieces with practiced hands. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and tailored blazer gave him an air of distinction that matched his reputation. People knew him here. They whispered when he walked by, pointing discreetly at the man who had once ranked among the top 20 chess players in the world. Alexander liked the attention. He'd grown used to it over the years, ever since he was 12, and newspapers called him a prodigy. Now, 20 years after his peak, he still came to the park 3 times a week to play against whoever dared to sit across from him. Few ever won. Most walked away shaking their heads, wondering how they'd lost so quickly. Another day, another victory, he muttered to himself, adjusting his knight to stand perfectly centered in its square. The ritual calmed him. Each piece had its place, its purpose. Unlike people, chess pieces followed rules that never changed. The park hummed with the usual afternoon crowd. Children chased each other around the fountain. College students sprawled on blankets with textbooks. Street musicians played jazz on worn saxophones. And around the chess tables, a mix of serious players and curious tourists gathered to watch her play. Alexander had just defeated his third opponent of the day, a businessman in an expensive suit who thought his Ivy League education would somehow translate to chess skill. The man had stormed off after losing in 12 moves, leaving a $20 bill on the table. Anyone else want to try? Alexander called out to the small crowd that had gathered. His voice carried the slight accent of his Russian childhood, though he'd lived in New York for 30 years. I'll even give you a handicap. You can take my queen. A few people laughed nervously. Others shook their heads. They knew better than to challenge the park's resident Grandmaster, especially when he was in this mood. Cocky, showing off. That's when he noticed her. She stood at the edge of the crowd, slightly apart from everyone else. A woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing about her stood out at first glance. Jeans, a plain blue sweater, worn sneakers. But something in the way she watched the game caught Alexander's attention. Her eyes didn't wander like the tourists. They fixed on the board with unusual focus. Alexander felt a familiar itch, the desire to prove himself against someone new, someone who thought they understood the game. You, he called out, pointing directly at her. The lady in blue, do you play? The crowd turned to look at her. She seemed startled by the sudden attention, taking a half step back. A little, she said, her voice so soft that people had to strain to hear. Alexander smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. A little is enough, come sit. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. What's your name? She hesitated, looking around as if searching for an escape. Finding none, she stepped forward. Maya, she said. Maya Lin. Well, Maya Lin, I am Alexander Petrov. Perhaps you've heard of me. He didn't wait for her answer. International Grandmaster, 3-time winner of the Manhattan Open. Maya nodded slightly as she took the seat opposite him. Her hands, Alexander noticed, were slender but strong-looking. The hands of someone who worked with them, not soft like the hands of the academics or business people he usually played against. How long have you been playing chess, Maya Lin? He asked, resetting the pieces with quick, practiced movements. On and off since I was a child, she said, watching him arrange the board. She reached out to help, but he waved her hand away. I always set up. It's my table. He placed the last pawn in position and rotated the board so she had the black pieces. You know the basic rules, yes? Pawns move forward. Knights jump in L shapes. Maya nodded again, her eyes on the board. Something about her stillness bothered Alexander. Most people fidgeted, especially beginners. They talked too much or too little. They tried to seem confident or made excuses in advance for their inevitable loss. Maya just waited. The crowd had grown. Weekend chess in Washington Square always drew spectators, and Alexander Petrov's matches more than most. People stood 3 deep around their table now. A young man with glasses and a chess club t-shirt pushed to the front. You should go easy on her, Petrov. he called out. She's new. Alexander snorted. Chess is not a game where we go easy. Either you know how to play or you learn by losing. He turned to Maya. We'll play with the clock. 10 minutes each. Do you understand how the clock works? Before she could answer, he launched into an explanation of the chess clock. How pressing it after each move transferred the time pressure to your opponent. How running out of time meant losing the game regardless of board position. Maya listened quietly, her eyes flicking between Alexander's face and the clock. When he finished, she asked, Can we play without the clock? I prefer to take my time. A murmur ran through the crowd. Nobody refused the clock against Alexander Petrov. It was part of his advantage, his ability to make strong moves quickly, to pressure opponents into mistakes. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. Afraid you'll lose on time? I just prefer to think carefully, she said. $20 says she beats him, someone in the crowd said loudly. I'll take that bet. Another voice responded. Petrov hasn't lost in this park for months. Alexander felt a flash of irritation. He didn't like being the subject of bets, as if he were some horse at the track. But he liked even less this quiet woman's reluctance to play by his rules. The clock stays, he said firmly. Chess is as much about quick thinking as it is about deep thinking. If you're not ready for that, perhaps checkers would suit you better. He gestured toward another table where two old men played the simpler game. A faint color rose in Maya's cheeks. She straightened in her chair, and Alexander felt a small thrill of satisfaction. He'd gotten to her. Fine, she said. With the clock, Alexander set the timer, 10 minutes for each player, and placed the clock between them on the table. White moves first, he reminded her unnecessarily. That's me. He made his first move without hesitation, pushing his king's pawn forward. 2 spaces, the most common opening in chess. Simple, direct, establishing control of the center. Maya studied the board for a moment before responding with the same move, mirroring him. Alexander smiled slightly. Beginners often copied their opponent's opening moves, not knowing what else to do. The scholar's mate is the fastest checkmate in chess, Alexander said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. Just 4 moves, let me show you. He moved his bishop out diagonally, setting up the classic trap. Maya's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table. Alexander noticed they were steady now, not trembling as they had been when she first sat down. She responded not with the move a beginner would make, the one that would walk right into his trap, but with a knight move, developing her piece toward the center. Alexander frowned slightly. It was a standard defensive move, one that showed she at least knew the basics of opening theory. This might take longer than 4 moves then. You've played before, he commented, moving his queen out early, an aggressive move that many coaches advised against, but one that Alexander used, often against weaker players. It put immediate pressure on them, forced them to react. I said I had, Maya replied quietly, developing her second knight, rather than responding directly to his threat. A few more moves passed in silence. Alexander played quickly, confidently, barely taking time to think. Maya was more deliberate, using perhaps 15 or 20 seconds per move. Not slow enough to burn too much clock time, but careful. As the opening phase of the game transitioned into the middle game, Alexander found himself slightly annoyed. The woman played textbook moves. Nothing creative or interesting, but nothing obviously wrong either. Safe, boring chess. You play like a computer, he said, capturing one of her pawns with his bishop. No imagination. Maya didn't respond to the taunt. She simply recaptured his bishop with her knight, maintaining material equality. Her face remained calm, her eyes steady on the board. The crowd had grown quieter, watching the game with more interest than Alexander's usual quick demolitions provided. A few people who had been about to leave stayed, sensing something unusual in the air. 15 moves in, Alexander realized he didn't have the overwhelming advantage he usually established by this point. The position was roughly equal. Maya had developed her pieces efficiently, castled her king to safety, and connected her rooks. Basic principles well executed. It irritated him. Time check, he announced, glancing at the clock. I have 8 minutes remaining. You have 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Better speed up, Maya Lin. She nodded slightly but didn't rush her next move. She pushed a pawn forward, threatening his knight. A simple move, but one that forced him to make a decision. Retreat, exchange pieces, or find a counterattack. Alexander chose to exchange, capturing her pawn with his knight. Chess was often about simplification when you were the stronger player. Fewer pieces meant fewer complications, fewer chances for a weaker player to find tactical opportunities. But, as Maya recaptured his knight with her bishop, Alexander noticed something that made him pause. The position that emerged wasn't simpler at all. Her pieces suddenly had open lines, diagonals for her bishops, files for her rooks. What had looked like passive play now revealed itself as patient positioning. For the first time, Alexander really looked at the woman across from him. Really looked. Her calm brown eyes, the slight tension around her mouth, the way her fingers moved with practiced precision when she touched the pieces. Nothing wasted, no hesitation once she decided on a move. Alexander had played thousands of chess games in his life. He'd developed an instinct for recognizing the strength of his opponents, and something about Maya Lin was starting to set off warning bells in his mind. "Where did you say you learned to play?" he asked, his voice a little less confident than before. Maya looked up from the board, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "I didn't say," she replied. The crowd around the chess table had grown to nearly 30 people. Something about this game felt different from Alexander's usual matches, and the regular park-goers could sense it. The usual quick victory wasn't materializing. The quiet woman in the blue sweater was holding her own. Alexander studied the board, his confidence wavering slightly. 20 moves in, and the position remained balanced. Maya had lost a pawn but gained better piece activity. Her knights and bishops controlled key squares in the center. Her rooks were connected, ready to move to open files when the opportunity arose. "You play a solid game," Alexander admitted, trying to sound generous rather than surprised. "Did you compete in school tournaments?" Maya moved her queen to a more active position before answering. "Sometimes," she said, pressing the clock. 6 minutes and 40 seconds remaining on her side. Alexander frowned at her move. Her queen now exerted pressure on his king's side, where he had castled early in the game. It wasn't an immediate threat, but it limited his options. He would need to respond defensively, rather than continuing his own attack on her position. "Sometimes," he repeated. "You're being modest. You've clearly had formal training." He moved his rook to protect a vulnerable pawn. Maya didn't respond. Her focus remained entirely on the board, her eyes moving methodically from piece to piece, analyzing threats and opportunities. A small vertical line had appeared between her eyebrows, the only sign of her concentration. The man in the chess club t-shirt who had spoken earlier was whispering to his friend now, pointing at the position. "That's the Boleslavsky variation," Alexander heard him say. "You don't play that by accident." Alexander felt a flash of irritation. The young man was right. The pawn structure that had emerged on the board resembled a well-known variation named after the Soviet Grandmaster Isaac Boleslavsky. It wasn't something a casual player would stumble into without knowledge of opening theory. "Where are you from, Maya Lin?" Alexander asked, trying to distract her as she considered her next move. "Connecticut originally," she said without looking. "But I've lived in New York for about 10 years now." "And what do you do? Besides play surprisingly good chess, I mean." That drew a small smile from her. "I work at a bookstore, nothing exciting." Alexander nodded, as if this explained everything. So you read chess books, theory and such?" "Sometimes," she said again, that same non-committal answer. She moved her bishop to pin his knight against his queen, a strong tactical move that Alexander had overlooked. The crowd murmured. Someone whistled softly. Alexander stared at the board in disbelief. The pin was a serious problem. If he moved his queen, he would lose the knight. If he defended the knight, he would lose tempo, and allow her to increase her positional advantage. And if he did nothing about it, she could eventually capture the knight anyway. It was the kind of tactical shot that separated serious players from amateurs. "Well played," he said, his voice tight. He moved his queen, sacrificing the knight but freeing his most powerful piece. It was the best of bad options. Maya captured the knight without hesitation. "Check," she said quietly, the first time she'd announced a check in the game. Alexander moved his king out of danger. The crowd had fallen, completely silent now, watching intently. The dynamic had shifted. What had begun as entertainment, watching the park champion toy with another casual player, had become something else entirely. A real contest. Alexander glanced at the clock. 5 minutes for him, 6 minutes for her. She was playing faster, now more confidently, as if she'd been holding back before. "You're down a piece," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "But I have less time. Let's see if you can convert your material advantage before the clock runs out." It was a weak attempt to frame his increasingly difficult position as a simple matter of clock management. Anyone who understood chess could see that Maya wasn't just ahead in material, she had the better position too. Her pieces coordinated beautifully, while his were increasingly passive and defensive. Maya pushed a pawn forward, opening a diagonal for her bishop to threaten his queen. The move served multiple purposes at once, typical of high-level chess. Alexander felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. He had underestimated her completely. What had begun as a casual exhibition match to entertain, the crowd and stroke his ego had turned into a fight for survival. "You should have told me you were a tournament player," he said, moving his queen to safety. "You didn't ask," Maya replied. "You asked if I played chess." The simplicity of her answer made someone in the crowd laugh. Alexander shot an angry glance in that direction. "I'm still the one with more experience here," he said, his voice harder now. "Tactics are nice, but strategy wins in the end." As soon as the words left his mouth, he regretted them. He sounded defensive, like a man making excuses before he'd even lost. The Alexander Petrov of 20 minutes ago, confident, borderline, arrogant, seemed to have vanished. Maya didn't respond to his comment. She simply continued playing, each move revealing a deeper understanding of the position than Alexander had given her credit for. She wasn't just moving pieces, she was executing a plan. 30 moves into the game, Alexander found himself in serious trouble. His king was exposed, his pieces uncoordinated. Maya had sacrificed a pawn to open lines for her rooks, and now they dominated the board, restricting his king's movement. The crowd had grown even larger. Word had spread through the park that something unusual was happening at Alexander Petrov's chess table. Even people who didn't play chess stopped to watch, sensing the tension in the air. 3 minutes each, someone announced, checking the clock. Alexander felt a surge of hope. Time pressure affected everyone. Even strong players made mistakes when the clock ran low. If he could complicate the position, create problems that required time to solve, he might still escape with a draw or even a win. He sacrificed a pawn, attempting to create counterplay. It was a desperate move, but desperation sometimes worked. Maya considered the board carefully, taking 30 precious seconds to analyze the sacrifice. Then, instead of capturing the pawn, she moved her queen to a seemingly quiet square. Alexander frowned, not seeing the threat immediately. Then it hit him. Her move set up a discovered attack. If he captured her rook, as she was inviting him to do, her bishop would deliver a devastating check, forking his king and queen. He would lose his queen and, shortly after, the game. He looked up at Maya, seeing her in a new light. This wasn't luck or a few memorized opening moves. This was real skill. The kind that came from thousands of hours of serious study and practice. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, he noticed that her eyes weren't just brown. They had flecks of gold in them, catching the afternoon sunlight. "Just someone who loves chess," she said. Alexander turned his attention back to the board. searching desperately for a way out of his predicament. The tactic she had set up was crushing, but perhaps there was a resource he had missed. Some saving grace. There wasn't. Every variation he calculated ended in disaster. If he avoided her trap by not capturing the rook, his position would remain terrible, down material with a vulnerable king. If he fell into the trap, he would lose immediately. The chess clock ticked down, 2 minutes left. "I think I've been hustled," Alexander said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You're clearly an experienced tournament player." Maya shook her head slightly. "I never claimed to be a beginner. You assumed." She was right. And that made it worse. His own arrogance had led him into this situation. He had seen a quiet woman watching chess games and assumed she was just another admirer of his skill, another easy victim for his ego. "Well played," he said, extending his hand across the board. "I resign." A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by scattered applause. Alexander Petrov didn't resign games in Washington Square Park. It simply didn't happen. Maya seemed surprised by his concession. "The position isn't lost yet," she said, "and we both have time on the clock." "I know when I'm beaten," Alexander replied, "and I'd rather resign with dignity than play out a hopeless position." She accepted his handshake. Her grip was firm but not aggressive, like her chess play. The crowd erupted in conversation. Money changed hands as bets were settled. The young man in the chess club t-shirt pushed forward. "That was amazing," he said to Maya. "The way you handled the Sicilian defense was textbook perfect. Where do you usually play?" "I've never seen you at the Marshall Chess Club or any local tournaments." Maya seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "I don't play in clubs," she said. "Just casually, here in the park sometimes." Alexander had begun resetting the pieces, a habit so ingrained he did it automatically. But his movements were mechanical now, his mind elsewhere. He kept replaying the game in his head, trying to understand exactly where it had gone wrong. "Would you like to play again?" Maya asked him. "Without the clock this time?" The question surprised him. Most people who beat Alexander Petrov couldn't wait to walk away and tell others about it. They didn't stick around for a rematch where he might restore his wounded pride. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. Maya shrugged slightly. "I enjoyed our game, and I think you did too once you realized I could actually play." Despite himself, Alexander smiled. She was right again. Once he'd gotten past his initial shock and irritation, he had enjoyed the challenge. It had been weeks, maybe months, since he'd faced a worthy opponent in the park. "Yes," he said, finishing the setup of the pieces. "I'd like that. No clock, just chess." As they began their second game, the crowd remained, sensing that they were witnessing something special. Not just a chess match, but a moment of respect forming between two people who had found in each other something unexpected, an equal. Their second game began differently. Alexander chose the English opening, pushing his queen's bishop pawn forward 2 squares. It was a more flexible, less aggressive start than his previous game, a sign of newfound respect. Maya responded with a symmetrical formation, mirroring his move as she had in the first game. But this time, Alexander didn't take it as a sign of inexperience. He knew better now. "So, a bookstore," Alexander said as they developed their pieces. "Which one? I'm something of a reader myself." "Riverside Books on 112th Street, Maya replied. "It's small, but we have a good chess section." "I know it," Alexander said, surprised. "I've bought books there, though I don't remember seeing you." "I mostly work in the back, ordering, inventory." She moved her knight to f6, a standard developing move. "I'm not usually at the register." As they played, more of Maya's story emerged. She'd grown up in New Haven, where her father had taught her chess when she was 6. She'd played in school, then in local tournaments. Nothing major, she insisted. Just small weekend events in Connecticut. Alexander wasn't entirely convinced. Her play was too strong, too sophisticated for someone with only casual tournament experience. But he didn't press the issue. Instead, he focused on the game, which was proving even more interesting than their first. Without the pressure of the clock, both players took more time with their decisions. The crowd thinned somewhat. Some people had other places to be, and without the drama of the clock counting down, there was less immediate tension. But a core group remained, watching the battle of minds unfold. "You favor the Sicilian defense," Alexander noted when Maya responded to his king's pawn advance with the characteristic c5 move. "That's a complex opening, not something casual players typically master." Maya shrugged slightly. "I like the imbalances it creates. The asymmetrical pawn structure leads to more interesting positions." It was the most she'd said about chess strategy so far, and it revealed a deep understanding of the game's principles. The Sicilian wasn't just a sequence of memorized moves to her. She understood its underlying strategic concepts. Their pieces danced across the board, testing each other, probing for weaknesses. This game was less tactical than their first, with fewer immediate threats and captures. Instead, it was a slow positional struggle, the kind that revealed a player's true understanding of chess. The young man in the chess club t-shirt had stayed to watch. He stood with a small notebook, jotting down the moves as they were played, a common practice among serious chess enthusiasts. "You're playing the Najdorf variation," he commented when Maya moved her queen's knight pawn forward. "That's Bobby Fischer's favorite." Maya nodded but didn't respond verbally. Her concentration remained fixed on the board, where Alexander was considering his next move. The mention of Fischer made Alexander think. The Najdorf was indeed associated with the legendary American champion, who had used it throughout his career. It was also incredibly complex, with reams of theory devoted to its many variations, not the kind of opening someone picks up casually. "Did you ever play in rated tournaments?" Alexander asked, making his move. "USCF events?" Maya hesitated before answering. "A few, when I was younger." "What was your rating, if you don't mind me asking?" She seemed uncomfortable with the question. "It was a long time ago, I don't really remember." Alexander didn't believe her, but he let it go. Some chess players were private about their competitive history. He could respect that, even if his curiosity was growing by the minute. As the middle game progressed, Alexander found himself enjoying the contest immensely. There was something refreshing about playing against someone whose strength matched or possibly exceeded his own, especially after months of easy victories in the park. Maya played a move that surprised him, sacrificing a bishop for 2 pawns and an exposed position for his king. It wasn't immediately clear if the sacrifice was sound. Alexander spent nearly 10 minutes analyzing the position before accepting the piece. "Brave," he commented as he removed her bishop from the board. "We'll see," she replied, a hint of a smile, playing at the corners of her mouth. 3 moves later, Alexander understood the depth of her concept. The sacrifice wasn't about material, it was about king's safety and peace activity. His extra piece was uncoordinated, while her remaining forces surged forward in a coordinated attack. "Very nice," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The small crowd that remained had fallen silent, sensing the critical moment in the game. Even those who couldn't fully appreciate the strategic nuances could feel the tension. Alexander defended carefully, finding the only moves that prevented an immediate disaster. The position stabilized somewhat, but Maya maintained pressure, never allowing him to fully consolidate. "You know," Alexander said as he pondered a particularly difficult decision, "there's a tournament next weekend at the Marshall Chess Club. Nothing major, just a local rapid event. You should enter." Maya looked up from the board, studying his face as if trying to determine his motivation for the suggestion. "I don't play in tournaments anymore," she said finally. "Why not? You clearly have the talent." She made her move before answering. "Chess was complicated for me. I loved it, but it became too much. Too much pressure, too many expectations." Alexander understood immediately. He'd seen it before, talented young players who burned out from the intensity of competitive chess, parents pushing too hard, coaches demanding results, the constant pressure to study and improve. "I know what you mean," he said. "When I was younger, after I got my Grandmaster title, Everyone expected me to be the next world champion. When I peaked at number 18 in the world rankings, people acted like I had failed somehow. Maya looked genuinely interested. What happened? Alexander shrugged. Life happened. I realized I enjoyed playing chess more than I enjoyed the professional circuit. All the travel, the pressure, the politics. So I became a teacher instead. I coach some promising juniors, write books, give the occasional lecture. And play in the park, Maya added. And play in the park, he agreed with a smile, where apparently I can still get my ego checked when needed. Their game had reached a critical position. Alexander's material advantage was balanced by Maya's superior piece coordination and his vulnerable king. The outcome remained uncertain. A new spectator joined the crowd, an elderly man with thick glasses and a cane. He watched for a few moves, then leaned toward the young man with the notebook. The woman, he whispered, though his whisper was loud enough for others to hear. She reminds me of someone, the way she plays. The young man nodded. I was thinking the same thing. There's something familiar about her style. Alexander heard their exchange but kept his focus on the board. Maya had just played a particularly insightful move, trading queens in a position where conventional wisdom would suggest keeping them on. But her instinct was correct. The resulting endgame favored her active pieces. You're very good at this, Alexander said, genuine admiration in his voice. So are you, she replied. As they navigated the complex endgame, more pieces left the board. Eventually, they reached a position with just kings, knights, and pawns remaining. Alexander studied the position carefully. In his younger days, he had been known for his endgame technique. If he could survive Maya's earlier pressure, this was where his experience might give him an edge. But Maya played the knight endgame with remarkable precision. Each move served multiple purposes, protecting pawns, creating threats, maintaining mobility. It was the kind of endgame mastery that took years to develop. The elderly spectator suddenly straightened up, his eyes wide behind his thick glasses. Know who she reminds me of, he said, his voice louder now. Maya Lin. Not just her name, her style. She plays like Maya Lin, the prodigy from the 90s. Alexander's hand froze over the board. He looked up at Maya, whose face had gone very still. Maya Lin, the old man continued, excited now. The girl who beat Kostakov in the New York Open when she was just 12. Remember that game? Beautiful queen sacrifice on move 23. Everyone thought she would be the first woman to compete for the world championship. Then she disappeared from chess, must be 20 years ago now. The young man with the notebook was typing furiously on his phone. You're right, he said after a moment. Maya Lin, chess prodigy, born 1987 in New Haven, Connecticut. U.S. junior champion at age 11. Defeated 3 Grandmasters before age 13, then suddenly stopped playing in tournaments around 2000. All eyes turned to Maya, whose gaze remained fixed on the chessboard. A faint color had risen in her cheeks. Is that true? Alexander asked quietly. Are you that Maya Lin? For a long moment, she didn't answer. When she finally looked up, her expression was a complex mixture of emotions: embarrassment, resignation, and perhaps a hint of relief. I haven't played a serious game of chess in almost 20 years, she said, until today. The revelation sent a ripple through the small crowd. Whispers spread outward, reaching people who had been casually observing from a distance. Alexander sat back in his chair, a strange feeling washing over him. He had spent the afternoon being humbled by someone he had initially dismissed, and now he discovered she was actually a legend in chess circles, a former prodigy whose games were still studied. Why did you stop playing? He asked, genuinely curious now. You could have been a grandmaster. Maya's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table. For the first time since they'd met, she looked vulnerable. That's a long story, she said, and we have a game to finish. Alexander glanced down at the board. The position remained complex, with chances for both sides. But somehow, the outcome seemed less important now than it had just minutes ago. Yes, he agreed. We do. He made his move and the game continued, but everything had changed. They were no longer just two strangers playing chess in the park. They were two people with shared experiences, shared struggles, and a shared love for the 64 squares between them. The crowd around their chess table had grown again. Word had spread through Washington Square Park that the legendary Maya Lin, the chess prodigy who had vanished from the competitive scene 2 decades ago, was playing against Alexander Petrov. People who had left earlier returned with friends. Chess players from other tables abandoned their games to watch. Someone was recording the match on their phone. The quiet afternoon game had become an event. Maya seemed uncomfortable with the attention. Her shoulders hunched slightly, and she kept her eyes fixed on the board, as if the growing audience might disappear if she didn't acknowledge them. "We can stop if you want," Alexander offered quietly, noticing her discomfort. "Call it a draw." She shook her head. "No, I'd like to finish." Alexander nodded, respecting her decision. Despite the revelation of her identity, the game itself remained beautifully balanced. His extra piece was offset by her better pawn structure and more active king. Neither player had a clear path to victory. The young man with the notebook had become something of an impromptu commentator, explaining the position to newcomers in hushed tones. "This is incredible," he was saying. Maya Lin was considered one of the greatest talents in American chess history. She beat Grandmaster Kostakov when she was just 12 years old, a game that's still studied today for its brilliant queen sacrifice. "Why did she stop playing?" someone asked. The young man shrugged. "Nobody really knows. There were rumors of health issues or problems with the pressure. She just disappeared from tournaments around 2000 and nobody in the chess world heard from her again." Maya could hear them talking about her as if she wasn't there. A familiar feeling of anxiety began to creep up her spine, the same feeling that had plagued her in tournament halls long ago. But she took a deep breath and focused on the position. Just the board, just the pieces. Everything else could wait. Alexander watched her with growing fascination. He had competed against many talented players in his career, but there was something different about Maya, a natural intuition for the game that couldn't be taught. And now, knowing her background, he understood why her play seemed so familiar. He had actually studied some of her games in chess books, brilliant attacking combinations played by a young girl who was being hailed as the next great American champion. "It's your move," Maya reminded him gently. Alexander blinked, returning his attention to the game. He advanced a pawn, threatening to create a passed pawn on the queen side. Maya responded immediately, using her knight to blockade the potential passer. The position remained tense with chances for both sides. As they played, more of Maya's story emerged through the whispered conversations around them. Someone had pulled up an old article on their phone, a feature from Chess Life magazine, circa 1999, profiling the young phenomenon who was breaking gender barriers in the traditionally male-dominated world of competitive chess. It says here she was expected to become the youngest female Grandmaster in history, the person with the phone said, before Judith Polgar's record. Alexander knew the name. Judith Polgar was the strongest female player in chess history, the only woman to have been ranked in the top 10 players in the world. For Maya to have been mentioned in the same breath was remarkable. "Is it true?" he asked Maya during a particularly complex position, when they both needed time to think. "Were you on track for the Grandmaster title?" Maya's fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table, a nervous habit he hadn't noticed earlier. "I had 2 Grandmaster norms," she said quietly. "I needed one more to get the title." Alexander's eyebrows rose. Grandmaster norms were incredibly difficult to achieve, specific performance benchmarks in top-level tournaments. Having earned 2 by age 13 was exceptional. "What happened?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Maya moved her knight to a better square before answering. "My mother got sick," she said simply. "Cancer. Terminal. I needed to be home, not traveling to tournaments." The straightforward way she stated it made the words even more impactful. Alexander nodded, understanding immediately. Chess was important, but family came first. No one could fault a 13-year-old girl for choosing to spend time with her dying mother rather than pursuing chess glory. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was a long time ago," Maya replied. "After she passed, I just couldn't find my way back to chess. The joy was gone. Everything I loved about the game had become tangled up with grief and pressure and expectations." Their conversation had attracted the attention of those standing closest to the table. The young man with the notebook had stopped writing, listening intently. The elderly spectator who had first recognized Maya wiped something from his eye. "So you just walked away," Alexander said, "from everything you had worked for?" Maya nodded. "I stopped playing competitively, stopped studying. Eventually I stopped playing altogether." She gestured at the board between them. "Until about 6 months ago when I started coming to the park occasionally, just to play casually, anonymously. No pressure, no expectations." "And how does it feel?" Alexander asked. "To be playing again?" For the first time that afternoon, Maya smiled fully, a warm, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Like coming home," she said. Alexander returned her smile, understanding completely. For all its complexity and intensity, chess was home to people like them. A place where the mind could find both challenge and peace. Their game continued, entering its third hour. The position had simplified somewhat but remained balanced on a knife's edge. Maya's technique was impeccable, especially considering her long absence from serious play. Whatever rust might have accumulated in 20 years away from competition had been quickly shaken off during their first game. The park had begun to empty as evening approached. The golden late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the chess table. But no one in the crowd seemed inclined to leave. They sensed they were witnessing something special. Not just a chess game, but a return. "Knight to e5, Maya said, making a move that forced an exchange of pieces. Alexander considered the resulting position. With fewer pieces on the board, the chances of a decisive result were diminishing. But neither player seemed disappointed by this. The quality of the game mattered more than the outcome. "You know," Alexander said as he responded to her move, "there's still time." "Time for what?" "For chess. For competition, if you wanted it. There are players who earned their Grandmaster titles in their 30s, even 40s. Maya looked up from the board, studying his face. "Why are you saying this?" Alexander shrugged slightly. "Because talent like yours is rare. It seems a shame for the chess world to be deprived of it." "I have a life now," Maya said. "A job, friends, a routine that works for me. I'm not sure I want to disrupt that for the uncertainty of competitive chess." "I understand," Alexander said, "but there are options beyond the professional circuit. Weekend tournaments, club championships, ways to play seriously without making it your entire life." The young man with the notebook stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me," he said. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm David Chen, president of the Manhattan Chess Club. We meet every Wednesday evening at the community center on Houston Street. We'd be honored if you would consider visiting. Just to play, no pressure." Maya seemed taken aback by the invitation. "I don't know. Think about it," David said, handing her a card. "We're a friendly group, all levels of players. Some strong masters, but also plenty of amateurs who just love the game." Alexander watched as Maya took the card, turning it over in her fingers, thoughtfully. "You don't have to decide now," he told her, "but know that the door is open if you ever want to walk through it." Maya nodded, slipping the card into her pocket. Then she turned her attention back to the board. They played on as the shadows lengthened. Their game had reached an endgame with kings, knights, and just a few pawns remaining. The position was so balanced that neither player could make progress, without risking losing. After a few more moves, Alexander extended his hand across the board. "I think this is a draw," he said, "unless you want to play until midnight." Maya accepted his handshake with a smile. Draw agreed. The small crowd applauded as they began picking up the pieces. Many came forward to speak to Maya, asking questions. About her games from years ago or simply expressing admiration for her play today? She answered politely but briefly, clearly still uncomfortable with the attention. Alexander noticed her glancing toward the park exit several times as if planning her escape. "Let me help with that," he said, stepping in smoothly. "Maya and I need to put the chess set away now. Thank you all for watching." The crowd gradually dispersed, though many lingered nearby, still discussing the games and the unexpected appearance of a chess legend in Washington Square Park. As they packed up the pieces, Alexander found himself reluctant to end their encounter. "Would you like to get a coffee?" he asked. "There's a good place just across the street. We could talk more about chess or not about chess. Whatever you prefer." Maya hesitated, looking at him with those thoughtful brown eyes. For a moment, he thought she would decline. Then she nodded. "Coffee sounds good," she said, "but maybe somewhere quieter, away from the park. I've had enough attention for one day." Alexander smiled. "I know just the place." As they walked away from the chess tables, the elderly spectator who had first recognized Maya called after them. "Will you be back tomorrow?" he asked. "To play again?" Maya and Alexander exchanged glances. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." They left the park together, two chess players with very different journeys but a shared language. The silent conversation of 64 squares that had brought them together on an ordinary autumn afternoon that had become anything but ordinary. The coffee shop was tucked away on a quiet side street, far enough from Washington Square Park to avoid the chess players who might recognize them. It was small and cozy, with worn leather chairs and bookshelves lining the walls. Classical music played softly in the background. "My mother got sick," she said simply. "Cancer. Terminal. I needed to be home, not traveling to tournaments." The straightforward way she stated it made the words even more impactful. Alexander nodded, understanding immediately. Chess was important, but family came first. No one could fault a 13-year-old girl for choosing to spend time with her dying mother rather than pursuing chess glory. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was a long time ago," Maya replied. "After she passed, I just couldn't find my way back to chess." The joy was gone. Everything I loved about the game had become tangled up with grief and pressure and expectations. Their conversation had attracted the attention of those standing closest to the table. The young man with the notebook had stopped writing, listening intently. The elderly spectator who had first recognized Maya wiped something from his eye. "So you just walked away," Alexander said. "From everything you had worked for?" Maya nodded. "I stopped playing competitively, stopped studying. Eventually, I stopped playing altogether." She gestured at the board between them. "Until about 6 months ago when I started coming to the park occasionally, just to play casually, anonymously. No pressure, no expectations." "And how does it feel?" Alexander asked. "To be playing again?" For the first time that afternoon, Maya smiled fully, a warm, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Like coming home," she said. Alexander returned her smile, understanding completely. For all its complexity and intensity, chess was home to people like them, a place where the mind could find both challenge and peace. Their game continued, entering its third hour. The position had simplified somewhat but remained balanced on a knife's edge. Maya's technique was impeccable, especially considering her long absence from serious play. Whatever rust might have accumulated in 20 years away from competition had been quickly shaken off during their first game. The park had begun to empty as evening approached. The golden late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the chess table. But no one in the crowd seemed inclined to leave. They sensed they were witnessing something special, not just a chess game, but a return. "Knight to e5, Maya said, making a move that forced an exchange of pieces. Alexander considered the resulting position. With fewer pieces on the board, the chances of a decisive result were diminishing, but neither player seemed disappointed by this. The quality of the game mattered more than the outcome. "You know, Alexander said as he responded to her move. There's still time. Time for what? For chess. For competition, if you wanted it. There are players who earned their Grandmaster titles in their 30s, even 40s. Maya looked up from the board, studying his face. Why are you saying this? Alexander shrugged slightly. Because talent like yours is rare. It seems a shame for the chess world to be deprived of it. I have a life now, Maya said. A job, friends, a routine that works for me. I'm not sure I want to disrupt that for the uncertainty of competitive chess. I understand, Alexander said, but there are options beyond the professional circuit. Weekend tournaments, club championships, ways to play seriously without making it your entire life. The young man with the notebook stepped forward hesitantly. Excuse me, he said. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm David Chen, president of the Manhattan Chess Club. We meet every Wednesday evening at the community center on Houston Street. We'd be honored if you would consider visiting. Just to play, no pressure. Maya seemed taken aback by the invitation. I don't know. Think about it, David said, handing her a card. We're a friendly group, all levels of players. Some strong masters, but also plenty of amateurs who just love the game. Alexander watched as Maya took the card, turning it over in her fingers, thoughtfully. You don't have to decide now, he told her, but know that the door is open if you ever want to walk through it. Maya nodded, slipping the card into her pocket. Then she turned her attention back to the board. They played on as the shadows lengthened. Their game had reached an endgame with kings, knights, and just a few pawns remaining. The position was so balanced that neither player could make progress without risking losing. After a few more moves, Alexander extended his hand across the board. I think this is a draw, he said, unless you want to play until midnight. Maya accepted his handshake with a smile. Draw agreed. The small crowd applauded as they began picking up the pieces. Many came forward to speak to Maya, asking questions about her games from years ago or simply expressing admiration for her play today. She answered politely but briefly, clearly still uncomfortable with the attention. Alexander noticed her glancing toward the park exit several times as if planning her escape. Let me help with that, he said, stepping in smoothly. Maya and I need to put the chess set away now. Thank you all for watching. The crowd gradually dispersed, though many lingered nearby, still discussing the games and the unexpected appearance of a chess legend in Washington Square Park. As they packed up the pieces, Alexander found himself reluctant to end their encounter. Would you like to get a coffee, he asked. There's a good place just across the street. We could talk more about chess or not about chess, whatever you prefer. Maya hesitated, looking at him with those thoughtful brown eyes. For a moment, he thought she would decline. Then she nodded. Coffee sounds good, she said. But maybe somewhere quieter, away from the park? I've had enough attention for one day. Alexander smiled. I know just the place. As they walked away from the chess tables, the elderly spectator who had first recognized Maya called after them. Will you be back tomorrow? He asked. To play again? Maya and Alexander exchanged glances. Maybe, she said. We'll see. I come, here to think sometimes, Alexander said as they settled at a corner table with their drinks. Not many people know about it. Maya wrapped her hands around her mug, seeming to appreciate the warmth and the privacy. It's nice, she said, looking around. Reminds me of my bookstore. For a while, they sipped their coffee in comfortable silence. The intensity of their chess battles and the commotion that followed had left them both needing a moment of quiet. Through the window, they could see the sky turning deep blue as evening settled over the city. You play beautifully, Alexander said finally. Even after all these years away from the game. That's rare. Maya looked down at her coffee. Thank you. You're quite good yourself. I've had the advantage of playing continuously for the past 30 years, he pointed out. You walked away for 2 decades and came back playing at near master strength. Well, it's remarkable. She shrugged slightly. Chess was such a big part of my childhood. I guess it gets into your blood, your way of thinking. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked. Walking away when you did? Maya considered the question carefully. I regret the circumstances that made me leave, she said. But the decision itself? No. My mother needed me, and later I needed time to figure out who I was beyond chess. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. I understand that better than you might. Think. When chess becomes your identity at a young age, it's easy to lose yourself in it, to forget there's a world beyond the 64 squares. Exactly, Maya said, a hint of surprise in her voice, as if she hadn't expected him to understand. Everyone saw me as the prodigy, the future champion, never just as Maya. And who is just Maya? Alexander asked, genuinely curious. She smiled, more relaxed now that they were away from the crowd. Someone who loves books as much as chess, who enjoys hiking upstate on weekends, who volunteers teaching literacy at a community center in the Bronx. Nothing extraordinary, but it's mine. Sounds pretty extraordinary to me, Alexander said. Maya took another sip of her coffee. What about you? Do you ever regret not pushing harder on the professional circuit? You could have competed for the world championship. Alexander laughed. That's generous of you to say, but no. I reached my ceiling. Number 18 in the world was my peak. I'm at peace with that. He paused, reflecting. There was a time when I wasn't. When I felt like I'd failed because I didn't become world champion. But eventually I realized I love chess too much to let ambition ruin it for me. That's wise, Maya said. Wisdom that came with a lot of therapy, Alexander admitted with a self-deprecating smile. And a divorce. They talked for nearly 2 hours, their coffee growing cold as the conversation flowed from chess to books to life's unexpected turns. Alexander told her about his teaching career, his chess students, the books he'd written on middle game strategy. Maya shared stories about her life after chess, college, travel, finding peace in a quiet life surrounded by books and a small circle of friends who knew nothing about her former chess fame. So what happens now? Alexander asked, as the coffee shop began to close. Now that people know who you are? Maya sighed. I don't know. Part of me wants to run away again, go back to my anonymous life. They left the park together, 2 chess players with very different journeys, but a shared language, the silent conversation of 64 squares that had brought them together, on an ordinary autumn afternoon that had become anything but ordinary. The coffee shop was tucked away on a quiet side street, far enough from Washington Square Park to avoid the chess players who might recognize them. It was small and cozy, with worn leather chairs and bookshelves lining the walls. Classical music played softly in the background,